Jeff Bell is a fantasy analyst for Football Guys who co-hosts their daily fantasy and dynasty shows. He's done work with fantasy pros as well. He's a girl dad, a Devi nerd, and he's also a CPA, so hit him up for any of your accounting needs. These are his late round perspectives. Every time I have someone on Perspectives, I think like how many shows I've done with them, like what our history. Have we done a show together, you and I?
We have not. I don't think that we have. I think this was be the very first one.
Yeah, but here's the crazy thing: we've done a panel together.
Yes,
we did the panel at the expo, and we get to see each other now yearly at the expo. Are you going to be there again this year?
I will be, definitely.
Okay,
it's
good.
about 2 hour drive for me. So
I was going to say, yeah,
hard for me not to go.
It's fairly close for you, which is nice. Yeah, I mean, look, anyone, I say this all the time, but anyone who is thinking about going to the Fantasy Football Expo, would you agree with me? I would assume 2 thumbs up, definitely do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great opportunity. I remember my first couple times going. If you're in the content world, it's one of those things that you meet people and you realize that they're actually your friends. It's not just random. Yeah. Like nobody's on the internet. You have real relationships there, and solidifying that in person is great. And then if you are a fan, it's a great opportunity to come out and meet people. Everybody's very open and accepting and loves to talk to everybody else. And I've met with several people that came as fans the first year and then became content creators after that.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I think that, like, even if you're just strictly a fan, you will be able to get, and I'm not even saying a fan of like an analyst or anything. I just mean like a fantasy football fan, you know, just someone who's like really into this stuff and nerds out about it. Like there is stuff for you. You can like literally every conversation, when you go from one conversation to the next, like people are generally talking about fantasy football for that upcoming season and such, which is a whole lot of fun. Are you currently in rookie draft hell like I am right now?
Very much so. I do a handful of safe leagues, so those kicked off this year, and then just kind of in general, it seems to be the week that everybody maybe lets the dust settle last week with the NFL draft happening, and then everything kicks off. It seemed like on Monday, everything just started up.
Like all at once, immediately. I'm on the clock like all the time. I'm on the verge of like not realizing I'm on the clock, and someone in my league is yelling at me, all that kind of stuff. Well, Jeff, look, I'm really excited to have this conversation today. We got some fun things that we're going to talk about. But before we get into those things, like I usually do this with every Perspectives guest, but talk to me not just about your background. I mean, I want you to talk about your background, but also sort of the journey for you in the fantasy football space, because you've been writing content, you've been doing content for a pretty long time now. And I want to give that context and that background for folks who, you know, are maybe new to some of your work.
Yeah, it's really crazy how quickly it feels like you become a veteran in doing this, because it definitely doesn't feel like I've been doing it that long. Once I've done 4 seasons now, once you've done 4 seasons, it feels like you're fully in it. But really, I mean, I've played fantasy football since I remember my very first experience was a Sports Illustrated. They had this salary cap game where like you could lock in your lineup. I played with my friends, and it was Kurt Warner's like rookie year. And I got him week 2 for the bottom bargain basement price. And so I locked him in as like the cheapest quarterback on the slate in his first season, week 2, wrote him all year long. And so basically you kind of had like a $50,000 budget similar to DFS, but you lock it in as like that price there, and you would be able to get gains on your players when you get rid of them. It was just a fun game. And that tells you, I mean, late 90s, 99 or so, 98 was his first year. And so that, and playing since then, and really I wanted to get involved in the content creation world. And I always kind of thought that you just needed to be in an elevator with Matthew Berry, like, and just to spur the moment in order to become a content creator. And never really pursued too much. In 2015, when DFS started to explode, I made friends through an acquaintance, somebody that was at Roto Grinders, and I started to talk with him, and he kind of told me, you know, if you're going to do daily fantasy content, sure, that's going on right now. But if you want to do other stuff, it's just oversaturated. Don't even bother. And so I had that in my mind for a couple years there. And then the pandemic came, and I kind of fell down the Twitter rabbit hole then and started to get involved there. And that's when you just discover layers upon layers, and you start to find these things. And so it was really January 2021, really December 2021, that I December 2020 that I started writing articles. I started out with a site Going for Two. Jeff Lambert's great there. He's great at getting people started. And then I started with Fantasy Intervention shortly after that with Chase Vernon, and then meeting Dave Kluge, meeting Steph Smalls, who became my best friends in this space. And doing that, Jeff Lambert was able to get me connected with Fantasy Pros. I volunteered to do Devy content. He was like, I'd love to have Devy content. And then he had a connection with Fantasy Pros, and they were like, hey, we want Devy content. And so it was not even like 2 or 3 months of doing content that I suddenly was at Fantasy Pros, basically leading their Devy department. And so I did that kind of through that off season, spun up rankings, those types of things for them for Devy content, and started to do behind the scenes things for them, editing, those types of things, and learning how to do that process. And that kind of, by the end of my first regular season in 2021, they kind of gave me a green light to go ahead and write what I wanted to write in their site, things like that. And I had made the connection with Joe Bryant through Dave, but also at the expo in the summer. And I had done kind of a guest spot for Football Guys in the summer of 2021. I wrote a couple articles there, and Joe and I talked at the expo, and I've been a Football Guys subscriber fan since I can remember. And then after the season ended, almost immediately right after the season ended in January, Joe picked me up to go to with Football Guys. So I've been there since 2022.
Man, first off, for anyone who has not interacted with Joe Bryant, who is the co-founder and leader over at Football Guys, easily the nicest human being that you will like. To me, in the fantasy football space, there are two people that really are sort of like guiding lights, in my opinion, and it's Joe and Bob Harris. Like those two guys, they're just genuine human beings. They genuinely care. They're just great people. And, anyone who is sort of working alongside them, and now Bob's with Football Guys, which is awesome. Yep. But, it's cool to, that's another reason why the expo is so cool, is because you can go to that event and meet someone like Joe and fall into this opportunity that you fell into, and be able to work alongside him, which is really great. Was there like something burning inside of you to do content in the first place? Was it something that like, you have your day job and you're like, I need some sort of like creative outlet or some sort of out because I'm sure a lot of people are in the same situation that you're kind of in.
Yeah, there absolutely was. And I was the type of kid, I wanted to be a general manager when I was a kid. And I would play with my baseball cards like all day long. I would make fake teams and create the stats and everything. And so I'd do that for all the 3 major sports, baseball, basketball, and football. When I was a kid, it was we had Tecmo Super Bowl, and then like kind of Madden started to step, early days of like SNES Madden. But like you didn't really have like Madden like you do now, where you could actually build franchises. But once that kind of hit the scene, I was doing that all the time. But I really wanted to go into sports writing, was what I really wanted to do. I was the type of kid of basically I got to the point by like 3rd or 4th grade when the Sports Illustrated would arrive at the school library every week. They would set it aside and Jeff would get it like the first checkout, more or less. Nice. And I would read it like cover to cover. Rick Riley at the last page. I remember reading that vividly. I was the type of kid that I always had there was I think it was 5th grade. I had this football encyclopedia that I had gotten, and I kind of had it under my desk like throughout the day, just like kind of reading this massive stat encyclopedia for like the 1993 season. So I've always wanted to be a writer. Once I got through high school, I was in all the writing things that I could be in, but when I got to college, practical mind kind of took over in terms of getting a degree. I'm a CPA, so very, very practical in that regard, because it was just seemed pretty daunting to go into sports writing at that time. But I mean, that time was when Bill Simmons was kind of coming on the scene, and that's somebody that I've really looked up to. But it's always been a major passion of mine to do writing. And so getting to this opportunity and be able to do that was, I mean, eye-opening, life-changing. It's been amazing.
So you being a CPA, would you describe your approach to fantasy more numerical and analytics based, or are you more, again, I always sort of categorize it as like you're either analytics or you're film based, but how would you just describe how you are as an analyst?
I would say everything is how I would look at it. And I think that it's film-based for sure, especially when it comes to rookie evaluations. It's one that I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, basically Friday night lights. And so like football has been a part of my life since I can remember, and watching college football every Saturday, watching NFL every Sunday. So it's one of those that I think that I have a pretty good ability of, you can tell the way guys move when you watch them. If this is an NFL player, or this is not an NFL player, or like those types of things when you're watching the film when it comes to prospects. So I'll be very film based when it comes to prospects, but when it comes to fantasy for the NFL season, I do projections, and that's where a lot of my rankings and valuations and those different things get driven off of those projections, because I like to, through both processes, I try to not see what the consensus is before I kind of start to go through and kind of put my ranks out and figure out via projections, and then maybe see where consensus lies and maybe start to see the values there. Or when it comes to rookie valuation, I build the database up basically from the ground that we use for the Football Guys rookie guide, just from, and it's less, I'm not really watching the guys through the season, because college football has turned into my outlet where I can just watch it and enjoy it and be a fan, not watching it because I need to see this wide receiver from Alabama and like that type of thing. I just want to watch Alabama play Georgia. And so I really hit it hard once the NFL season ends and step into rookie season. And so that's where I try pretty hard not to see where consensus lies on those prospects until I really kind of have my first cut at least and start to build out that direction. So I'd say I'm both, but really when it comes into it, I mean, there's certainly a level of feel narrative. Sigmund Bloom's one of my favorite people as well. And so he's the mayor of Narrative Street. I'll buy into that a little bit too, just kind of reaching all different directions that I can.
Yeah, I should have also mentioned Bloom as another guy who, obviously part of Football Guys, but, as another person who's just unbelievably kind and gracious in the fantasy space, who's, been around for a minute, and, he is one of those people who is just very, very open and accepting of all. So, should have shouted him out as well. Speaking of your rookie evaluations and this being rookie draft season, before we dig into sort of the individual players, I definitely want to dive deep and get your take on some of these guys. What have been your high level thoughts so far in rookie drafts this year? Like from a game theory perspective, do you have any game theory tips? Are there like particular teardrops that you think are noteworthy? Like what are you just seeing and feeling as you're drafting in these rookie drafts this year?
I think right now, I mean, there's kind of we always get it every year where there's like the 107-ish teardrop that you see with the top guys. And then there's the next teardrop that's about 203 or so, where that one kind of hits. And then there's that end of the second teardrop where you kind of got these day two wide receivers that you like their landing spots or those types of things. And then everybody else after that. And so I think it's in that regard, I don't think it's all that different than what we see a lot of years. Maybe the top tier isn't quite where it has been in some past years. I mean, there was the Jamar Chase going like 106 year, and we all knew that Jamar Chase was probably pretty good. And so like that year stands out, or even even last year with the Caleb Williams year, everybody's excited for Caleb Williams and those rookies there. So just kind of some of those years stand out maybe to separate themselves. But I think we've gotten there of talking ourselves into the blue chip players this year at least. But I think you're seeing the standard tiers. I think one of the things that I think is interesting is two guys, Tyler Warren and Matthew Golden, seems to be that everybody seems to be out on those guys. And those seem to be the guys that you can get at the 202 in some drafts where you're kind of like, hey, I understand the situation in Indianapolis might not be the best, but this guy was a consensus thought to be top 10 pick, went 14th in the draft, and I can get him at the 202 in a tight end premium league. Like, I'm going to do that. So
you mentioned Matthew Golden as well. You sent a tweet, I think last week, where you said that you are going to have a ton of Matthew Golden this year. And you obviously just mentioned him as someone who seems like a value. What are you seeing in Golden? Did you like him pre-draft as a prospect, or is this more driven by landing spot, or is it driven by, because I think that there's become like sort of this reverse psychology almost where the fantasy football community almost now overstates poor production profiles, like takes it almost too far without fact. And this is why I love the Zap model, because it at least grounds me. Like, yes, there are red flags to Golden's analytical profile, but there's also other inputs that are going into this model that can at least tell me, okay, he's not like someone I need to avoid at all costs, because there is, he's a first round pick, et cetera, et cetera. But what is it that you're seeing in Golden? I'm assuming if you're getting a lot of him, you liked him at least a little bit pre-draft too.
Yeah, I did like him. I think when you watch Texas's season, there were just big moments where he was the guy that they went to in those big moments relative to kind of Isaiah Bond being thought to be throughout the season the better prospect. Obviously, there are issues going on separate from football with Isaiah Bond. But I think when there was a lot of moments, gotta have it moments where Matthew Golden kind of was that spot. Then obviously the combine, whether or not he actually ran what he actually ran, but certainly he blazed it there. So that definitely helped. And then you see him landing in Green Bay in the first round, we feel pretty good about the Packers offense and Jordan Love and their ability to have a wide receiver step up. And, there's been the comments in the past from Matt LaFleur that, well, we don't need a wide receiver one in this offense, but then they turn around and actually take a first round wide receiver for the first time in 20 plus years. Maybe it tells you that they do think they need a wide receiver one in that offense. So, I mean, that's certainly part of it as well. And I think it's things like you led into this with where you'll see the biggest values that you can get is when consensus sets in really hard and it's just wrong. And so you're kind of looking at this as like this guy went, I think it was 22nd in the draft to first round pick. You could get him at the 203 in a lot of drafts. And a lot of people have decided we just don't think he's very good for whatever reason. And more often than not, I think when you look at it year to year, where value is actually created are the situations where we're just wrong. And Adam Harstad is another football guy that I really enjoy quite a bit. And he said something a while back that really kind of stuck with me of you want to look at a range of outcomes and you want to be able to be wrong in the right direction. And so that's where I think Matthew Golden, if you're getting him at the 202, the 203, then what's wrong in the right direction is he should have been a 108 pick and he's a wide receiver one in the Packers offense. And you just had a massive boom there. Wrong in the wrong direction. You took him over like Jack Besh, like kind of one of those things of, you kind of eliminated a lot of the risk involved in there. And another reason why I'm ending up with him, where I end up with everybody that I end up with is because of valuation, the ability to where I can buy them at. But I like to trade up I'm getting I have a lot of good dynasty teams. And so I have a lot of late round picks. And so like that late second, kind of throwing some extra things on top of that late second to be able to jump up into that 202 tier and to be able to grab him there. That's kind of where I end up getting a lot of him.
Yeah, that's a really good point about this year's drafts, where if you have sort of later seconds, like I have some where I'm like, 210 range or something like that. And if you ended up having multiple late seconds, I even think trading multiple late seconds and getting into that early second round range, and even, you could maybe even throw something back your way too, if someone's going by like a calculator or something like that. But realistically, what you're getting in the late second, if you're pairing two of those players up to get someone in that tier, a Matthew Golden, if you will, makes a lot of sense to me because there is that pretty, relatively dramatic tear drop. The other thing that I've been doing is when that there's like, let's just say that you have Golden and Luther Burden in the same tier, right? And that they're going to make it at the very latest to the 204 in a super flex tight end premium league. Let's just say that's how the draft is sort of shaped up. If you're sitting at the 201 and that team is on the clock, not a bad idea either to trade for the 204 at that moment, because they might not be as forward thinking into thinking like who's actually going to be available when that tier is about to just be completely gone after that 204 spot. So that's another thing that I've been doing a little bit in rookie drafts this year. But when it comes to Golden also, like it seems to me, fantasy managers are going to be reactive to landing spot. Like Emeka Egbuka is falling in drafts, in my opinion, is not going as high as he otherwise would because he didn't land in the best immediate production landing spot. The thing that's weird about Matthew Golden, he kind of did. Like you get Christian Watson likely not going to play at least the first half of the season. And he's also on a rookie deal. Like this is both a long-term and short-term thing. He's still in his rookie deal, last year of his rookie deal. Romeo Doubs, last year of his rookie deal. So we can envision a world where Matthew Golden in 3 wide receiver sets is going out there with Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed in the slot, and Matthew Golden on the other side in the perimeter in 11 personnel. And all of a sudden you're sitting there and, maybe Dontavian Wicks gets thrown in there a little bit and stuff. But like, to me, and maybe you disagree, but from a fit perspective, it seems like this is the exact kind of wide receiver Green Bay kind of needed, no?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And one, his ability to attack vertically is huge, but I think he's a player that can win at all three levels and can be that. Really, when you look at the Packers, I think that the knock on their wide receiver core right now is how role limited their players are. And like Jaden Reed can really do well of what Jaden Reed can do well, but he does what Jaden Reed can do. And Romeo Doubs does what Romeo Doubs can do. And that's about it. Whereas Golden can be that piece that really moves throughout, and you either put him out there, you can put him out there with Doubs and Wicks and move him to the slot, or you can put him out there with, he's kind of that skeleton key. And I think a lot of it's Lad McConkey, I think, is a little bit like this, where the view was that he was going to be a slot receiver, but then you saw him mid-season, they started to use him in deeper portions of the field, and that really unlocked a lot of Lad McConkey's game. But when you have that skeleton key receiver that can line up at all three different positions or can attack all three different levels of the field, that really accentuates the other players that you're able to put around him, and it makes the whole picture work that much better.
Yeah, I like when teams make it obvious to us about how they might be deploying their wide receivers, right? Yeah. Whereas in Tampa Bay, they get Emeka Egbuka, and now you have a situation where Mike Evans is on the last year, and he's going to be a free agent next year. But you have Mike Evans, who, of course, can play that X and play that perimeter role. But then last year, they go out and they draft Jalen McMillan, who was a slot guy in college, who we all probably thought was who profiled as a slot guy in the NFL. They didn't use him in the slot. They have Chris Godwin, obviously, coming off of his horrible injury, who thrived in the slot last year. They moved him back in there a little bit more than where he had been playing in the slot. And then Emeka Egbuka, another player who profiles more as a slot guy, gets drafted by Tampa Bay in a spot where not a lot of people thought that they were going to go wide receiver. He's been kind of a controversial player in rookie drafts so far. Where are you at with him, and are you drafting him above or below sort of where the market's at?
The 108 probably is about where I land with him. And if I can get him anytime between that 108 and later range, I'm pretty thrilled with that pick. And that's one of the fun things about safe leagues, because I feel like if you end up in a lot of analyst leagues or like fantasy community leagues, there's pretty hardline consensus on where players end up going. But you get into Scott Fish runs these safe leagues, and you get into some of those, and I got him at like the 112 in one league, and I was like, well, that was unexpected, but I'll certainly take him there. But I think it's anytime you kind of step past that, if he falls past that first tier, that's where I'm definitely grabbing him. I think it's interesting because, the parallels to Jackson Smith and Jigba are way too easy. Both Ohio State wide receivers, but the way that we saw the market react to Jackson Smith and Jigba's rookie year, going into that, we knew, he's up against it. His rookie year here with these other two, with Tyler Lockett, with DK Metcalf there. And then he kind of does what we would expect him to do. And there's just a tailspin dive on his fantasy value, dynasty value. And you could buy him for next to nothing. And then he comes back year two. Tyler Lockett's basically gone, and they kind of changed some things around in that offense. And now all of a sudden he's the breakout that you were expecting to see. And it's going to be interesting to see, is there a market correction that we're already kind of, I feel like, seeing that there's not market correction because of the fade that's on Emeka Egbuka, just because of what we think will probably be a 1 or 2 year situation. But if he does have diminished production that first year, is everybody going to be out on him again, just like Jackson Smith and Jigba? And that's probably where you need to lean a little bit more on the tape when you watch these guys, because if a guy shows that he belongs, it's just situationally why he's not getting the fantasy points that we want. He's checking a box there that you want to see, and then that opens up the opportunity later.
Hey, before you listen to more of this episode, I want to remind you to check out the Late Round Prospect Guide. The guide has everything you need to crush your rookie drafts this year. You get profiles for 80 running backs and wide receivers who are at the NFL Combine. You get profiles for year 2 players. There's information on the prospect and the year 2 models, and so much more. Learn more about it. Check it out now over on lateround.com. Now back to the show. I'm gonna just bring this up right now because I think it's a really, really, really interesting discussion. And actually, I'm gonna be doing an entire podcast. It's sort of more philosophical, but also we'll dig into this trade quite a bit for next week. But I do want to talk to you about this because I just think it's a really like interesting fantasy football exercise that has gotten people riled up a bit. You know, I sent a newsletter out yesterday, or we're recording this on Wednesday. It'll release on Friday. I sent the newsletter out though on Tuesday. And the newsletter was, you know, it's slow time in football during the football schedule. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to write up a couple of trades that I recently did. One of the trades I wrote up, people were like, oh, that was so lopsided in your favor, even though Trade Calculator said otherwise. And they're getting mad at me thinking that I'm just bragging that I fleeced someone. That's not the case at all. But the other trade was one where they think that I got the wrong side of the deal. And that deal was Rome Odunze for the 108. And I'm with you that I think Emeka Egbuka is a very good prospect, like a very, very solid prospect. And the 108 is where, you know, whenever I made that deal, I said to myself, this is a worst case scenario for my pick would be Emeka Egbuka, right? And so at the very least, I'm re-rolling wide receiver. I'm getting a different wide out for Rome Odunze, but I have a team that's really, really running back needy. And that team, you know, maybe Quinshon Judkins falls, like maybe one of these running backs like slips through one pick and I'm able to get one of them, instead of Emeka Egbuka. And what ended up happening was the 107's on the clock and I ended up moving up one spot by throwing a third into the equation because it's a 14 team league. So it was the equivalent of like a later third round pick, moving up one spot to get Quinshon Judkins. So at the end of the day, it was basically Rome Odunze and a late third that's not going to be that valuable for Quinshon Judkins on a team that absolutely, you know, I don't have many opportunities to get running backs in this kind of league because it's very deep. It's with analysts and stuff like that. And so I sent that out and I wrote about it and it made its way to Reddit. Shout out Reddit, folks on Reddit. People hate it, but I think that it's a good community to at least have discussion whenever people are being reasonable, right? And you know, people just are not on my side at all with giving up Rome Odunze for that 108. And it's really interesting that you bring up Jackson Smith and Jigba when it comes to Emeka Egbuka, because just like JSN, just like Emeka Egbuka, Rome Odunze was in a situation where last year where it was just bad across the board with a lot of competition. So people were saying, why would you give up on Rome Odunze now for a player who's going to be in a very similar situation as Odunze in 2026, right? And so first off, I want to ask you, would you have made that trade? And then the other thing I want to ask you just generally, you know, and we can maybe get into like Luther Burden a little bit and how you feel about the Bears offense, but, are you, when these seasons happen, like when a Rome Odunze year one happens, when a JSN year one happens and we can make excuses, how do you sort of balance that? Like, are you willing to just throw away the poor peripherals, or are you just sort of mixing everything together to try to just come out with the best like expected value, if you will, for that guy moving forward?
So I would not have done that deal. I still believe in Rome Odunze, and I think it's easy to look at the situation last year, having rookie Caleb Williams, having the mess of the coaching staff with the Bears, having Keenan Allen there, and dismiss the production. And so that's where leaning into believing that Rome Odunze obviously went in the top 10 in his class just 1 year ago. And we've seen the situation change dramatically with Ben Johnson coming in, with Keenan Allen gone. Obviously, they added other pieces as well. But with the rumors around DJ Moore, the supposed unhappiness around DJ Moore, I would still be willing to bet on Rome Odunze kind of still popping as that wide receiver one within that Bears offense. And Caleb Williams still having I still believe Caleb Williams has tremendous upside, and I'm not punting on him after just 1 year either. So that's where I land on that. And a lot of that's because dynasty based, I'm wide receiver to default, probably likely there, and kind of looking for production that I can plug in from running backs later, not really gambling on those more premium running back profiles as opposed to a wide receiver that, again, top 10 pick. I kind of understand why the production was lower last year. But that being said, if Rome Odunze just doesn't look the part to start this year, I am the type that I'll rip cord pretty quickly on that situation. Right. Of, you know, we've seen 2 off seasons now. We've seen an opportunity to move in your direction, and we're not seeing it get put together.
Yeah. Here's the thing I want to say too, is number one, when I make a deal like that, and I think you would agree with this, I would assume you would agree with this too. I'm not making that action and saying I think Roma Dunze is absolutely going to go south. I think that I fully reckon, like even in the prospect guide in the year 2 profile section, I comped Roma Dunze's year 1 to DeAndre Hopkins. It's a very similar path, a very similar situation as what DeAndre Hopkins went through. So I fully recognize that situation, like how that all looks. But the one thing I'll say, and you mentioned JSN and how his value dropped, a decent bit. If you look at like DLF ADP year over year, so last year at this time, Jackson Smith and Jigba's wide receiver ADP was wide receiver 35. It was a little bit higher on Keep Trade Cut, but it was wide receiver 35. Now, at the time of this recording, DLF doesn't have updated ADP for May, but if you look at Roma Dunze on Keep Trade Cut, Roma Dunze is wide receiver 20 right now on Keep Trade Cut, which tells you that he's number one, obviously going to be boosted by the Ben Johnson move, right? But they just added a top 10 tight end, a top 50 wide receiver in this class, and Roma Dunze's overall wide receiver rank dropped by 4 spots, despite those things being added. And on top of that, he's coming off a rookie season where I agree. Like whenever whenever this hits Reddit and people are like, and I'm trying to explain like his yards per route run was really poor and all this kind of stuff. They're like, well, you're not giving that any context. I'm like, I am. I fully recognize that, his catchable target rate was really low and that the scheme was bad, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I don't think we can just fully dismiss everything, like it still happened. It still matters, because if we were to dismiss Roma Dunze and what happened with him in his rookie season, we need to do that for every wide receiver historically, when we know that there's been other wide receivers historically that have been in a similar situation, maybe not identical, but a similar enough situation where they didn't pan out, right? Like where this was a predictive year 1 rookie season. And I like what you said about not seeing something pretty much right away, from him and sort of flipping there, because let me ask you this. Where does a Dunze, do you think, like what kind of season does he need to have in order to increase his dynasty value into year 3? Like right now he's wide receiver 20. Okay. And look, there's something to be said about even maintaining dynasty value, right? So I'll even say just maintaining, right? I won't even say gain. So what does Roma Dunze need to do from a production standpoint and from, just a giving value to your fantasy team standpoint here as a sophomore in the NFL for him to at least maintain value in dynasty? Like, where do you think he needs to rank?
Wide receiver 2 at the bottom. I think if you're outside of top 24, I think you've got a real problem there. But I think there's moving pieces with Chicago, though, as well, because we don't know what DJ Moore's short-term, long-term future is going to be. And obviously, we haven't seen Luther Burden on an NFL field yet. And I do tend to believe that the Luther Burden pick, I think, was a little bit, I think they saw TreVeyon Henderson sitting there, and
I think so too.
They had that card filled out. They were standing next to the podium ready to say TreVeyon Henderson, and then he went, and it was one of those that we get those in our rookie drafts. I feel like where you're like, all right, Luther Burden's going to be there. I'm going to take Luther Burden. And then Luther Burden's gone, and you're like, oh, wow, I would really like to trade this pick right now. And I've got 8 hours, so maybe I can manufacture a trade because that was the guy that I wanted. In the NFL draft, they have 5 minutes. And if nobody's calling, then you got to turn something in. So I think that there's some context around maybe that Luther Burden pick. But you can't deny that they did make that pick, and they obviously liked him in some level to be able to make that pick. But I think in terms of fantasy scoring, you need a wide receiver 2 season, top 24 season, or at least you're feeling like you're seeing the big plays, you're seeing those types of things, you're seeing the shift in the offense moving in the direction of he is going to be that guy. He is going to be Caleb Williams, wide receiver 1 target. Those types of things, some obviously seeing a top 24 season, some intrinsic type things where you can obviously see he's making these plays, the pick capability is there, volume will come pretty soon if it's not here already, versus a player that really just kind of looks lost, and they're just, he's kind of out there being Tim Patrick in Ben Johnson's offense, and maybe he'll occasionally catch a touchdown, and you're kind of like talking yourself into it because he accidentally ends up with 9 touchdowns, but he only has 50 receptions and 700 yards in year 2. Like those types of things would be more red flag.
Yeah, and so that's where I stand too. Like I think that it's what's really strange about the Rome Odunze stuff is that I actually think I'm going to be really heavy on Odunze in redraft this year. Like I think I'm going to draft him a lot because the cost to acquire is not going to be as significant in a middle round redraft pick. Sure, like I'll go that direction all day long. When I know that the profile's there and the upside still exists. But if you look at like a median expected outcome, just a median outcome, his projections this year, Mike Clay is the gold standard with projections. Mike Clay's projections right now have Rome Odunze as wide receiver 41 this year. My projections have him at wide receiver 36. And so my point is that if he does hit that median outcome, which I think is obviously possible because that's the median outcome, then all of a sudden we're now like fantasy managers can be forgiving after 1 season to a degree. They are not forgiving after 2, which is why going back to what you said at the top, where, you mentioned like, I will flip him as soon as I can, even if you take like a little bit of a loss early in the season. I do think that this is one of those scenarios where you would have to do something like that because it's a falling knife situation, right? Where it's like, it is like, it could, right? It could go in that direction where if he doesn't get off to a hot start and things just start to spiral in the wrong direction and he does end up hitting that like fringe wide receiver 3 season, there is no chance that fantasy managers are going to be forgiving enough to keep him around that wide receiver 20 to 25 price tag, entering year 3 in that system. Whereas with a guy like Emeka Egbuka, I think that because of JSN, people are probably going to be more forgiving if he does have, not only that, but I think that there's also something to be said about peripherals and us being a smarter consensus than we used to be, where, like part of the problem with Rome Odunze, of course, it's all situation based and it was really bad last year, but he also had poor peripherals, like objectively, right? Like his 1.18 yards per out run rate, it just wasn't like he was okay in terms of like yards per team pass attempt and stuff, but like there were some of these secondary numbers that are troubling. And Jackson Smith and Jigba actually had slightly better numbers, than Odunze did there. But like if Emeka Egbuka, like let's say that Tampa Bay decides to not run him out that frequently for whatever reason. And they do, look at like Chris Godwin's rookie year. Chris Godwin's rookie year is a great example of this, where they didn't run him out that frequently. He didn't run a ton of routes, but his yards per route run was unbelievably good, right? Yeah. And so if Emeka Egbuka at least shows that, you don't think that there's going to be a lot of fantasy analysts that are out there saying like, we got to buy into this guy because he has a 2.3 yards per route run rate as a rookie. And then, oh, by the way, now all of a sudden Tampa Bay's situation is a lot better. But even if it's not better, like we will still kind of buy into the emerging talent as opposed to the guys that are sort of over the hill and Mike Evans, if he does stick around, and Chris Godwin. So that's kind of where I was thinking. But at the end of the day, like I didn't do that trade thinking I was fleecing the other manager, Right. I'm not sitting here like I thought it was a fair trade on paper. And maybe someone says, no, you should have gotten like the 106 or something like that. Totally fair. Totally fine. But I think that when we analyze these individual players, it's so easy to fall into the trap of only looking at one side of the argument, yes. Only looking at the rosy side. It is totally reasonable to think that Rome Odunze is the better piece in that trade. Totally reasonable. But I also think it's reasonable to say this could go south. Like this could be a situation where even if he does have the talent, his situation might not actually be as good as we think it is, entering 2025. But I wanted to take some time to talk about that a little bit because it was a very hot topic this week. And this being late round perspectives, I like to talk about, what's going on with late round fantasy football and the show and the things I'm talking about and stuff. But anything else you want to add about Odunze before we move on here?
I think you've hit it really, really well. And you're really looking at realistic range of outcomes. And you talk about that median projection as being a wide receiver 36. And and I think one point that I think is really interesting, and I love the numbers and being able to paint the picture with that. And you're talking about the usage of Emeka Egbuka versus like the low yards per route run, those types of things with Rome Odunze. I think it's interesting when you've got a player like Emeka Egbuka and he's playing in a situational role and the team is saying when he is on the field, we are getting the ball in his hands because we believe in him. And where it goes the other direction on Rome Odunze is like he's going to be out there every single play because
volume based.
He can block and he can run 9 routes and he can do these things. But there's no intention on getting him the ball, and that's where I feel like you need to see that beginning, because it's like if you see the same thing of like, well, he's out there every single snap. He's doing a great job cracking down and blocking, and he is running these 9 routes, and they are fine giving him 3 targets per game versus having that flip of Ben Johnson stepping in and saying, DJ Moore, like, you can get on board or you cannot, but we do believe in Rome Odunze. We're going to make sure that he's getting his 10 to 12 targets per game and, scheme it up that he's going to be getting the ball.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, I think that the question that we really should be asking is not necessarily like, it's not even like fully about Odunze's talent. It's just, where are we attributing what happened in year 1 and how are we attributing it? Right. Like, you could sit here and be just this like, nerd in your mom's basement and say, oh, he's going to be terrible no matter what because he had a 1.18 yards per route run. But there's obviously a mix here and some context that's needed. But it's how much of that context are you going to allow to influence what those numbers are? That's what the question really is. And it's not an easy question to answer. And I think no one should be confidently and boastfully answering that question. Like, there's just a lot of nuance to something like that is not very easy to get out, number one, in a newsletter, let alone a Reddit post. You know what I mean?
Yes. And what I think that confidence right there is, I think that's the most exploitable thing in fantasy football, is when there's just confidence that you are convinced that this is the outcome for a player and not willing to live within that range of outcomes. And so I don't hate you for doing that trade. I think it's fine. I think it's way too, and you had the right mindset too. You're not walking into that thinking that you're winning this trade. That's when you get trades done. You're looking for a potential pivot. You're looking at the range of outcomes. You're looking at the potential valuation. This could be the situation where you still want to buy Rome Odunze in a year, even though the numbers don't support it.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden you can buy him back for a lot cheaper than what you originally sold him for. Like, you're seeing the things that you want to see. It's not leading to fantasy points, but there's reason. You can tell yourself the story. You can buy into the reason, and you can turn around and here's the second and this random player that I don't really care about anymore. And I'm buying Rome Odunze back, and all of a sudden, okay, it did click in year 3. DJ Moore is gone, or these things changed, and that's it. Nothing's finalized,
Right. And I also
values.
Yeah. And I also am like, look, this is something, I'm not always like so overt about trades and stuff because no one cares about my fantasy leagues. But in a situation like this, if Rome Odunze blows up and he's a star, right? And he's a next year, the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football, am I going to be upset? Of course. I want to win trades at the end of the day, but that's a result, right? Like, that's one of the many, many results that this could go down. And if you're not thinking about the many, many results and you're only honed in on that 99th percentile outcome, you're going to lose far more than win in the long run, right? We've all had trades where we lost greatly from the trade that happened, right? That's going to happen. I'm just walking through the thought process behind it because I think it's helpful for people to just generally think about fantasy football a little bit differently. That's why they're listening to a podcast like this in the first place. So, one player who people might be pretty confident in, given the landing spot and his general profile, is RJ Harvey. Where are you at with Harvey? Are you one who's willing to take him in the Travion tier, let's say, and get him in the top 7 picks, let's say, of rookie drafts, or are you kind of just waiting and seeing if he falls and that's where you're going to snatch him up?
I'm below market on him. I think he's fine, and certainly day 2 landing spot, that's great. I think that I tend to believe Audric Esme is going to be more involved than maybe people realize and want to realize, just because we've seen in the past where, Sean Payton says some nice things about Audric Esme. You look at goal line usage. I don't think Jaleel McLaughlin is going to go away. And so I don't think it's going to be the type of, I think what I'm seeing, at least maybe what I'm internalizing people doing, is viewing RJ Harvey as he's now our Alvin Kamara. And he's going to be the Alvin Kamara. He's going to catch 100 balls. He's going to be the whole focal point. Whereas, like, what I'm seeing with RJ Harvey is kind of rolling back to some of those Saints offenses that had Pierre Thomas and Mark Ingram and Darren Sproles together in a backfield, and Sean Payton kind of seeing of having Swiss Army knife utility out of your backfield and kind of leaning in that direction. Certainly, I think RJ Harvey can be the leader in that situation, but I think it's more they want to have options in their backfield as opposed to they said, these other guys are horrible. This guy's our Kamara, and he is going to be the leader of the backfield.
Yeah, like what are the odds? I was thinking about this when I was building projections, and you being a projections person too. Like what are the odds that he is a true bell cow back? Like to me, it feels like this is and again, people do keep comping like this backfield right now or RJ Harvey to previous Peyton backfields. I've seen Darren Sproles get thrown out there, which Harvey is not the same kind of player as Sproles. Right. The one player who I think he kind of might be like, if you want to have that historic comp, Pierre Thomas feels like the RJ Harvey, like that's what we could get out of it. Where Pierre Thomas was definitely viable in fantasy football, but it was more of a, in that sort of committee situation. And, the Alvin Kamara stuff to me, I mean, like Kamara was a excellent pass catcher coming out. The Zap model sees it that way as well. And Harvey to me has at least some analytical question marks as a pass catcher. Like it's not the cleanest pass catching profile that I've ever seen. I'm kind of like at market. I'm just kind of getting him if he falls a couple spots below where he generally goes. But, do you see like this being, I mean, it sounds like you see this being more of a committee than what folks are kind of projecting at this moment.
That's where I am. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a committee than what people are projecting. I mean, it's talk about range of outcomes again. Certainly it's within the range of outcomes that he is just the bell cow that they did look at Estime. They did look at Jaleel McLaughlin and say, these guys aren't it. This guy is going to be it. But I think it's also, again, you just see the way that Peyton has used backfields in the past. And I'm not writing off Estime completely like it seems that a lot have, and even McLaughlin I'm not writing him off. And you talk about maybe if Harvey's more the Pierre Thomas, then maybe McLaughlin is the Darren Sproles, and maybe Audric Estime, obviously we know what he would be. He's kind of the more that battering ram bell cow type of a back, or not bell cow, but heavy volume early down goal line type work. And so I think that's where I land on what they're trying to build out of this. But I don't think that there's a likelihood that RJ Harvey's the third running back, and he's just not that involved. When you use a day 2 pick on a guy, you kind of say that, okay, should be leading this committee.
Do you have Caleb Johnson above or below RJ Harvey? That to me is one of the tougher decisions right now.
I have Caleb Johnson above just because I think it's a little bit cleaner situation. Yeah. I mean, we have a pretty strong idea what Caleb Johnson's going to be. And there was moments where that was good for Najee Harris. There was moments where that wasn't the greatest for Najee Harris, but and maybe Jaylen Warren does have a larger role and Caleb Johnson is kind of pushed to the wayside. But I don't know. I would rather deal with what I think is a relatively clean 2-headed backfield than try to predict a potential 3-headed backfield.
Yeah, I think the fit's perfect for Caleb. Like everyone's talking about RJ Harvey being a great fit, which sure, like I don't disagree, but Caleb Johnson, he comped really closely to, analytically, of course, to both Le'Veon Bell and James Conner in the Zap model. And then, Jaylen Warren, this is something I talked about on the show earlier this week, but, Jaylen Warren is a free agent next year, and Mike Tomlin teams are no stranger to having bell cow back. So if Caleb Johnson, to me, in my opinion, if Caleb Johnson shows up and he's better than advertised, and which I think could definitely happen because he got drafted far later than where mock drafts had him and such. Like mock drafts had him as like a late second rounder. And so if he shows up and maybe he's a little bit more explosive than what his speed score showed, which was fine. I mean, speed score wasn't even that bad, but maybe he's a little bit more explosive and, he gives you that bell cow ability. I mean, we could very easily be looking at him being that player in 2026, which would be huge. And all of a sudden, if that's the case, I think most people would be taking Caleb Johnson over RJ Harvey. So, it's been a weird kind of back and forth decision for me. I've just kind of split it, which is really lame because, people want more boldness, with those kinds of takes, but I could see the outcomes for both of them being pretty favorable.
I just take Tyler Warren. So
yeah, there you go.
No, but I think it's And you mentioned mock drafts, and I think that context is important there because I think we're at a point now where even with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl only because they had Saquon Barkley, I think that you've got half the league that is just not going to value the running back position, and you just write it off. And I think it's one of the things that frustrations that we've been running into in fantasy dynasty the last couple of years, where you've got half the league just doesn't value the position at all. They're just not going to take a day 2 running back. They don't care. And then the other half of the league gets to a point where they say, well, we've got Ken Walker and he was really good, but we still value running back, and Zach Charbonnet's sitting here and he's the clear top guy on our board. So we'll take Zach Charbonnet too. And we'll just do that because that's where value dictates we move. And I think Caleb Johnson too is a player that maybe a percentage of those teams that would value that running back just didn't see him as a scheme fit for them, whereas he seems like a perfect scheme fit for the Steelers.
100%. One last guy I want to ask you about is Bashal Tutin. Are you in or out on Tutin?
Where do you think Travis Etienne's playing week 1 this year?
I still think it'll be Jacksonville, but I think there's a chance that it's not Jacksonville. I definitely think there's a chance.
Yeah, he's on that 5th year option, and exactly. I don't think that that's where it opens the door for him not to be a Jacksonville Jaguar, I think, now, and kind of go in that direction of having Bigsby and Tutin. I've not really been buying Tutin. Just I feel like I usually take like Kyle Williams is sitting there, or like a guy like that is kind of where I go in that tier probably. But team's going to tell us what they believe, and I think at long term, I think it says that Travis Etienne's not going to be a Jaguar long term, whether or not week 1, 2025 season is long term or not. I think that's the question I have in my mind.
Yeah, look, man, I'm a believer that anytime there's a new coaching staff, do not feel too comfortable with the existing personnel that's there. Right. You know, and sure, I can make that same argument for Rome Odunze in my favor, but I won't even make it because I think Odunze was obviously a really good prospect. It's a little bit different with a situation like that because he's still really young. I just mean like the existing veterans that are on that team. I don't think it's a lock that we, maybe early on in the season we see that same Etienne Bigsby kind of combo, but I think we could very easily see because I don't think Etienne is necessarily at this point in his career any better than a guy like Bashal Tutin. And Tank Bigsby is a different kind of player than Bashal Tutin. They actually kind of work pretty well in tandem where Bigsby's kind of that bruiser and Tutin can be that home run hitter, like honestly, like a Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet combination. And so, I think that we could see that happen, at least towards the end of the year, because Etienne is almost definitely not going to be a Jag in 2026,
Yeah. And James Gladstone coming in from the Rams. Obviously, Tutin's a sparked up guy. The Rams like those types of guys. And the Rams, by mandate, have to take a running back every single year. They've drafted a running back, I think, every single year since maybe 2017 was the last year they didn't draft a running back. So you knew James Gladstone in his first draft was contractually morally obligated to take a running back.
Speaking of the running back that they took, Jarquez Hunter, he's going after round 2 in these rookie drafts. Are there any favorites? Is he one of your favorites after round 2? Are there any other guys that you seem to be targeting a lot after those first 24-ish picks?
Yeah, Woody Marks landing with the Texans and stepping in there as a potential. We've seen Joe Mixon have the but pass catching complement in the past with Gio Bernard, with Samaje Perine there. So he kind of profiles very cleanly into that and that Texans offense. Jaden Blue landing with Dallas and kind of just the general uncertainty. One of the things that I really enjoy that I've got from you in the past is lean into that uncertainty in those situations and kind of placing a chip there to be able to have it break in that direction. I think Ollie Gordon landing in Miami is kind of looking at that as maybe the Raheem Mostert. This guy falls into 15 touchdowns just because they have so many struggles in their short yardage. And they brought in Alexander Madison, who also struggles in the short yardage. So Ollie Gordon kind of can be that answer there. And then another guy I see landing there quite a bit is Elijah Arroyo. And that's round 2 tight end. And I think that people see, maybe Noah Fant hasn't really happened for the Seahawks. What's the questions there? But I see that selection of Arroyo coming in as being a commitment to being a 12 personnel offense, 2 tight ends. He kind of profiles a little bit more as a big slot, power slot type of a player, as opposed to an inline tight end, classic inline type player. And they got AJ Barner long term that can be that piece, or Noah Fant can be there. And he's landing. You got a round 2 tight end that you can regularly get in round 3. That's somewhere that I'm willing to make a bet.
Yeah, I think going back to the Jaden Blue comment, I think there's like an 80% chance that Jaden Blue makes my late round dart throws list this year in the draft guide. It's like we're seeing more teams embrace some smaller running backs. I don't think that, historically we haven't seen the only day 3 running backs that have really hit that have been smaller. I mean, we had Bucky last year, we had Kyron Williams. I don't think Jaden Blue is like they were better between the tackles runners coming out, right? Like they saw bigger workloads. They weren't the kind of back that Jaden Blue is, but I do kind of think that Dallas might envision Jaden Blue playing a role like Jahmyr Gibbs plays, where they at least kind of get him, like maybe get him like 100 to 100, like not quite Jahmyr Gibbs, but maybe get him, and obviously he's not as talented, but maybe get him like 100 to 120 carries on the ground, but then let him do work as a receiver out of the backfield, because that's where he can be very, very electric. So I do like Jaden Blue. The Zap model really likes Jaden Blue as well. Any undrafted free agents that you've had your eye on as a Devy guy?
Are we talking like undrafted in the actual NFL draft, right?
Yes, that's what I was. Either way, though, any guys, literally, I mean, we're just talking like total dart throws regardless. Yeah.
In undrafted players in the actual NFL draft are total dart throws, but Eftim Chisholm landing with the Patriots, that was the one that when he kind of hit my radar in January, I tweeted like, Eftim Chisholm, you're a Patriot. And and we see him sign there. And then really kind of looking for scheme fits there, opportunity fits. I think Trey Stewart landing in Minnesota is interesting because we've seen, I don't think Ty Chandler was drafted, or if he was drafted, it was obviously
day 3. Yeah, day 3.
Yeah, but we know Minnesota had 5 picks in the draft. And so they signed him almost immediately when the draft ended. It's a pretty crowded backfield now with Aaron Jones there, with Jordan Mason, with Chandler still there, but that's opportunity. Raheem Sanders, Rocket Sanders, he was.
I was so mad. Were you surprised that Sanders didn't get drafted at all? Like I thought maybe a 7th round pick. Like when you're seeing Kyle Monangai get drafted in round 7, I thought it because Sanders at least has the athletic profile.
Yeah. And I think it was just volume of running backs this year. We knew that it was a heavier volume running back draft year this year. And so Sanders some people have Devy running back 1, 2 or 3 years ago. And so landing undrafted, I mean, Donovan Edwards kind of is a little bit similar of a explosive player when undrafted. He's very crowded there with the Jets. Jalen Conyers landing with Miami. That was a guy I was a little bit surprised was undrafted, because that's another Devy darling that everybody was kind of waiting for that. And it seemed like he figured some things out his last year there at Texas Tech, and then kind of didn't get drafted. But Miami, outside of Jonnu Smith, you're talking, what do they have? Farrell Brown. They got, Jalen, what's his name? Jalen, it's not Jalen Hill, is it? It's the guy that they kind of like a little bit that hasn't really done anything, but that's an opportunity for Conyers to make that team. And then a complete dart throw, Isaiah Nayor.
That's a Matt Waldman favorite, actually. It was Nayor.
Yeah, and that's just a sparked up size speed guy landing with the 49ers. And 49ers are one of these that obviously I feel like last year we knew it with having Ayuk, having Debo, having Ricky Pearsall come in, the emergence of Juwan Jennings. But really, once you get past those guys, it's pretty wide open. Yeah. Debo Samuel being gone there. And so that's where just one of these freak athletes that can make the team. But these are, again, complete like 16 team, like very deep dart throws.
Yeah. The 49ers seem to never get players you expect them to get at wide receiver and running back. Like ever, almost ever. Like even Watkins this year, like I didn't really do it for me. It seemed like a little bit of a reach and all that. And like, so yeah, I think like last year they did get Jacob Cowing, who I thought was at least interesting and might have been like loosely a Tank Dell type if things really hit for him. But even still, they do some really strange things. With their wide out picks in particular. I want to ask you just a couple of backfield questions before we go. We talked about Dallas a little bit. They barely did anything in this draft other than, getting Jaden Blue. They got Phil Maffa really late, which I think like hypothetically the two of them combined is actually not the worst pairing in the world, right? Like I thought personally, and this is kind of a tangent, but after the Browns got Quinshon Judkins and then they got Dylan Sampson, I thought that like Jaden Blue would have worked better in like a Cleveland backfield with Quinshon Judkins than a Dylan Sampson type. But at least Dallas is thinking about the archetype of these running backs a little bit. But Javonte Williams is there. Miles Sanders is there. Is Javonte Williams going to be a thing? Like, is that what we're looking at this year?
given his current value, I think it's worth betting and taking that bet, because if it hits, I mean, it's just a tremendous payoff. You're talking about an underdog right now, about a 10th round pick, I think, is where you can get Javonte Williams. And so I know he's kind of seems to be maybe that last guy that you can talk yourself into being a pretty clean running back one in that backfield. And so it's worth making the bet at his current value. I feel like you talk about the consensus getting smarter, and I think you're exactly right. I think that there was a time, maybe not even that long ago, when Javonte Williams right now would be sitting as like a round 5 player.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And where now it's kind of like leaning into the overcorrection, maybe, of like, we've gotten really smart, maybe we've gotten too smart. And so like, it's still kind of like, hey, this could be a guy that we all really liked 2 or 3 years ago, and the Cowboys don't have a running back. I mean, why not?
Yeah, it's really funny. I'm in an FFPC league, and you had to cut. We had to cut down a lot. Me and my co-manager had to cut down on a lot of guys because of the way that they have those leagues formatted. And Javonte Williams was basically going to be a cut candidate because we just had a lot of depth on this team. And so we ended up trading him for a future third before the NFL draft happened. Okay, and it's so strange that the draft happens, they don't take a day 1 or day 2 running back, and that's probably still the valuation of Javonte Williams, right? Like you probably can still throw like a third and get a Javonte if you really wanted to from a dynasty perspective. Like, it's weird how the market hasn't really shifted at all to the fact that all Dallas did was take day 3 running backs. And, we saw Rico Dowdle be relevant down the stretch last year. I think it's a pretty interesting spot where you just kind of have to like plug your nose and make the selection, if you're drafting them, because it's not gonna feel good. What about Isaiah Pacheco with the Chiefs only getting Brashard Smith in round 7?
That seems to be one. I think he's undervalued. I'm trying to get him when I can, just because it's kind of been out of sight, out of mind. I think maybe with him a little bit, we saw a little bit of that, we saw him come back, and he clearly wasn't himself when he came back. And he knew they were in the Super Bowl push. He tried to do that for them. In a normal situation, he probably never would have stepped anywhere near a field. And so we see some of those types of things and tend to write this player off. But I mean, Kareem Hunt I don't know. Like, I think that a healthy Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt is not touching the ball very often at all. It's not going to be a committee between the two of them. And, I love the landing spot of Brashard Smith. I made the comparison to Jerick McKinnon. That's, I think, pretty natural. And kind of those wide receiver / type routes that we saw McKinnon running when he was that running back 2 in 2022 over the last portion of the season. I mean, that's certainly in play, but again, you're talking about a 7th round pick doing that. I mean, this guy could not be anything at all. And you like the Chiefs because they hit with Isaiah Pacheco in the 7th round, gives you that belief on that. And seeing a pretty clear role, trusting Andy Reid, gives you a belief on that. But I mean, there's also the very strong likelihood that Pacheco is just the guy, and he should be. Again, this is like a 8th round pick right now, an underdog that you easily, I think right now it's fun to be in these underdog drafts because you easily see a guy like Isaiah Pacheco that it's like a couple positive news stories or a couple things, and you're getting him in round 8 and he's going to be a round 4 pick in a month. Yeah. And so I think that there's, you can kind of see these guys early in underdog kind of stand out in those directions. And I think he's primed for that.
Yeah, I remember I had Jeff Mueller on Perspectives during the season last year, and I asked him about Pacheco because it was kind of like a couple weeks, there was like talk about him returning and all this kind of stuff, and no one really knew the timetable at the time. And I asked Jeff like what he expected from Pacheco, and he's basically like, this is a lost season. Like, don't add, like, you don't need to add him on your redraft rosters. We shouldn't be bullish about, because it's a tough injury to just immediately come back from. There's gonna be a ramp up period. And so the fact that we saw what we saw from Pacheco really, to me, wasn't that much of a surprise, because I talked to somebody who studies that thing about injuries, and he said that this was going to be a difficult thing to come back from. So I'm with you. Obviously Pacheco holds a special place in my heart. He was one of the models, like bigger, just general hits over the last 5 years. But like, I do think that it's a pretty decent spot for him to be in. I don't know if he has RB1 upside per se, but I definitely think he's at least a value, and you can gain value from that. The last backfield I think everyone will want to hear about is Chicago. Like, is DeAndre Swift a thing now?
As long as Ken Walker and as long as Travis Etienne aren't Bears, I think DeAndre Swift can be a thing. But it's, again, you've got these pieces. There's already been the rumors about Kenneth Walker. I mean, there's been rumors about J.K. Dobbins laying out there. I mean, that's another guy you can get in like round 17, an underdog that, I mean, he's probably going to be playing somewhere. But I think it's really difficult to divorce the way that things ended with Swift in Detroit and Ben Johnson coming in there and thinking that it's going to be a fresh start and just like Ben Johnson's going to be behind him relative to maybe some of the other pieces that might shake free. I mean, we talked earlier in the show about TreVeyon Henderson. It seemed like the Bears were ready to go. TreVeyon Henderson, it seemed like the Bears were all over Ashton Genty if he was on the board at 10. And so, I mean, that tells you that I don't think Kyle Monunga is quieting that desire for a player like that.
Yeah, I actually think that Roschon Johnson's even kind of interesting right now too, just as like a random dart, because if you just look at what his projection looks like with this current backfield, it's like RB 40-ish, you know, it's not anything special, but you can get him 20 picks after that, you know, in a draft right now. And if things do stay the same, then obviously that's you're gaining some value there. And then there's injury upside if something were to happen in season to DeAndre Swift. And to me, you know, I feel like I've been crapping on Kyle Monunga in my podcast and stuff. I'm not trying. I mean, I've been actually throwing some 4th round darts at Monunga just because why not, you know, but at the end of the day, like I think Roschon Johnson was a better prospect, and you know, Johnson actually had some interesting peripherals last year where his success rate was 12 percentage points better than DeAndre Swift, better in basically every efficiency category versus Swift. So there could be something there if he's going to be sort of like the David Montgomery, Jamal Williams type in that Ben Johnson offense.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those that as you play more fantasy football, these gross guys get more interesting to you.
Yeah, right.
Kind of like, I mean, sure, I can see it working. Versus like, I feel like when you're relatively new or kind of going like whoever the new hotness is, like, yeah, I want that guy. Versus like, no, I'll take the discount on the gross guy, and if he's not anything, I'll cut him and move on. But if he is something, I mean, I've got the discount already.
Yeah, I'm just a big fan. I think this goes back to just playing a lot more too. I'm just a big fan of like trying to find those micro edges as much as possible in my leagues, where it's obviously a lot easier to gain value on your team to get the macro edges, to make the big trades and to have those trades work out. But if you can just gobble up, it's like the long tail, right? If you can just gobble up a lot of those micro transactions and win frequently with those transactions, maybe like a 70% win rate with those kind of transactions, that'll help your dynasty teams at the end of the day. You know, like having Roschon Johnson sitting on your bench as even a handcuff is still valuable, you know? And I think that people, it's not sexy, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's a very boring pick and a boring player to go attack. All right. I got one more question for you before I let you go. Just give me, look, it's early May. It's not even just May. We're recording this on May 7th, but I want a bold early take about the 2025 season from Jeff Bell.
Kyle Williams, rookie wide receiver 2 overall.
Ooh, I like that. So you're a big Kyle Williams guy.
I am a big Kyle Williams guy, and you know, part of it, it was flag plant back in January, but seeing through the process, but landing, I don't think he could have landed in a better situation than landing in New England. I think profile wise, the wide receivers that have worked in Josh McDaniels' offense, he kind of fits that really, really well. And I think you can see a pretty easy path to him being a heavy volume guy for Drake May, emerging quickly as Drake May's wide receiver 1. I'm sure Stephon Diggs maybe has something, I don't know, coming off that injury and like age 30, like that's real iffy to me. And so I think Williams can step up and be that obviously rookie wide receiver 2 overall.
Yeah, really strange profile for me. Like when I wrote up his pre-draft profile back in late February, basically is when I wrote it. I was like, I said something along the lines of like, Kyle Williams has a really good breakout score, because he did have a pretty good breakout score for like a player that was at the time projected to go like 300th overall, like with the draft capital input that I was using. And so I was like, but you don't need to worry about him right now, is what I basically said. And I'm like, little did I know he'd get steamed up and then he gets day 2 draft capital. Like I could have easily been early on Kyle Williams, but I was anchored too much to the way that people were looking at him from a draft capital perspective. So I'm with you. Like I think his profile, it's a little bit weird because he's he stuck around in college, but he had a good breakout age despite sticking around in college and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think he had a good, at least from an analytical perspective, he had a pretty good profile.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, of like maybe leaning into the narrative a little bit, but Washington State had a bunch of players. The coach left, a bunch of players opted out, and that last bowl game, how many players actually play in that bowl game? And he went out and he said, not only am I going to play, I'm going to set a Holiday Bowl record. I'm going to light it up in this game. And then like you see him, I remember the Senior Bowl, like Jalen Royals had a whole bunch of excitement at the Senior Bowl, but then there was a side-to-side that stands out in my mind of their release. And it was like Jaden Royals kind of like chopping his feet, like one of these like TikTok release type moves. Yeah. And it was Kyle Williams, like one step, I'm gone, like see you later. It's just so clean. And
just a like professional, wide receiver. Yes. Yeah. I dig it, man. Well, this was awesome. I loved hearing some of your takes. I think the listeners will absolutely love it too. Let everyone know where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, so everything is going to be at Football Guys, and you can find me on, I still call it Twitter because I refuse to not call it Twitter. But For Whom J Bell Tolls is all my socials. So that's the number 4. And then Football Guys right now, myself and Dave Kluge, we're doing the Dynasty show. We're about to dive in. I'm deep in my projections right now. And last year, we're going to run it back. Last year, we did divisional previews for each team, kind of leaning into those projections, looking for undervalued players by each division. And that's kind of the biggest thing that we're stepping into right now, getting my projections up and running. And so I'm a CPA, I do taxes. And so I was slammed during tax season. I plug in hard to the draft after that. And then after that's over, then I kind of hit the projections and start running into the off season. But that'll be my biggest chunk of content that I'm pushing out next.
Awesome. Yeah. And I definitely recommend you guys give him a follow. He's a great follow. We'll definitely give you guys some great takes. I'm on Twitter, which I still call Twitter as well, at Late Round QB. Make sure you're checking out the prospect guide. It's still for sale, of course, over on lateround.com. Otherwise, everyone, thanks for tuning in.